does look ridiculous, but it's the right of every person to choose. I mean, we have men nowadays wearing high heels and leggings.
Not so long ago, the communists denounced denim as an emblem of Western decadence. Today, 80% of Russians say they're orthodox, but few are likely to surrender relatively newfound freedoms or fashions. Neve Barker, AlJazeera, Moscow.
And talking of exotic clothing, Rio de Janeiro's annual carnival is now officially underway. Children have been performing the first street processions. The 5-day festivities showcase Brazil's top dance schools with extravagant performances, colourful costumes and brilliant street bands. You're watching Al Jazeera. Let's take you through the main stories now. There are reports of fresh shelling by government forces on the Libyan town of AlJazeera. Rebel fighters had claimed victory there after clashes with Gaddafi forces earlier on Saturday. At least 30 people, mostly civilians, have been killed. Anti-Gaddafi forces are celebrating in the key oil port of Ras Lanouf. They've managed to hang on to the city after repelling an attack by government loyalists. Reports suggest they're now heading towards Gaddafi's hometown of Sirte. In Benghazi, funerals have been held for those killed in a blast at a weapons depot. More than 17 people are thought to have died. Saudi Arabia has banned all demonstrations in the oil-rich kingdom. This comes a day after anti-government protesters rallied in the towns of Qatif and Hafuf. The protesters want the release of political prisoners and an end to government corruption. They're also calling for less powers for the ruling Al Saud family. In Cairo, the offices of state security officers have been set alight. On Friday, hundreds of protesters occupied the state security building in the port city of Alexandria. Demonstrators claim security officials inside were trying to shred sensitive documents. They say they were evidence of human rights abuses under the former regime. And staying with Egypt, the former Interior Minister has pleaded not guilty on charges of money laundering and profiteering. Habib El Adli was arrested last month and is widely blamed for a violent crackdown on anti-government demonstrators. In Somalia, it's emerged that more than 50 African Union peacekeepers have been killed in fighting there in the past 2 weeks. The deaths come amid a major offensive against al-Shabaab fighters who control large parts of the capital, Mogadishu. Well, the peacekeeping force in Côte d'Ivoire is to be reinforced by 2,000 soldiers and 2 combat helicopters. They're being drafted in as a political standoff between rival presidential claimants Laurent Gbagbo and Alassane Ouattara shows no sign of being resolved. Some of the fiercest fighting happened in a suburb of Abidjan on Thursday when at least 6 female demonstrators were killed. And China's Premier Wen Jiabao has pledged to reduce inflation and corruption and raise his people's income levels. Wen told the National People's Congress in Beijing the measures are necessary to maintain social stability. I said I'll be back at the top of the hour with more news coming up next on Al Jazeera. It's Listening Post. Stay with us.
Hello, I'm Richard Gisbert, and you're at the Listening Post. This week, one story in Pakistan reported 2 different ways.
Was he a CIA contractor? Was he a diplomat?
The CIA agent and the media.
The protesters continue to chant.
Nigerian journalism gets a shakeup all the way from New York. China clamping down on the news media to keep the Jasmine Revolution from spreading to the Far East, and taking stock of the footage they call B-roll in our web video of the week.
Do you need shots of ordinary people doing things for your next commercial? We got that B-roll.
We got that B-roll.
A pretty big news story has been unfolding in Pakistan over the past few weeks. Don't feel bad if you've missed it. Much of the news media did too. Some of the outlets that did report the story got it wrong and may have done so deliberately. On January 27th, an American named Raymond Davis allegedly shot and killed 2 Pakistani men in Lahore who he claimed were trying to rob him. The Pakistani media first speculated and then reported that Davis was with the U.S. Central Intelligence Agency. He was a CIA spy. The U.S. Embassy said that Davis was a mere technical advisor, and the State Department in Washington urged the U.S. media to go with that version of the story, which they did, until a British newspaper, The Guardian, reported that Davis was in fact CIA. Our starting point this week is Lahore, Pakistan. The case of the unquiet American, the disquieting effect that this incident has had on U.S.-Pakistani relations, and the noise that now surrounds the coverage and non-coverage of the story.
Pakistan. Tonight, an American man is in prison there accused of murder.
When the story first broke, it was a broad daylight affair.
It's just had blanket coverage in the Pakistani media. For the past month, the headlines have been entirely dominated by the Davis issue.
Investigations are underway and more facts about the shooting incident are being uncovered.
The situation always seemed a bit murky.
What had been painfully obvious, that Raymond Davis worked for the CIA, has now been reported.
Actually, the CIA connection was not obvious, not in the American media, because they did not report it until February 21st, 25 days after the killings and weeks after the Pakistani media were saying the shooter worked for American intelligence.
If you tune in to Pakistani television stations, day in and day out, they're talking about this incident, they're talking about the relationship with the United States, the fact that CIA spies are able to work with impunity throughout the country.
In the Pakistani media, it had been out there for several weeks that Davis was a CIA agent. News organizations were covering protests where you had Pakistanis in the streets who basically were holding up signs saying that this guy was a CIA agent.
It's been a sort of, media firestorm, really. We've had actual interrogation tapes from Davis with the police or in prison being released to the media and aired, and really this is, I think, pretty unprecedented stuff.
Initially, the Pakistani media's coverage ranged from the resourceful to the speculative to the bizarre. Reports that Davis was recruiting for the Pakistani Taliban, even supplying al-Qaeda with nuclear material.
The Pakistan media, in my view, has really been irresponsible in covering this. It's really infotainment. They bring on provocative guests who make a number of spurious arguments that are very much targeted to inflame and to arouse sentiments. You could say the CIA, I had a weather machine that made it snow in Lahore, and there's going to be someone that's going to buy that story.
But for all their editorial excesses, at least the Pakistani media were reporting the story with the CIA angle, which raised once again the problematic relationship that exists between Washington, Islamabad, and two intelligence communities that do not trust each other.
The media is playing a leading role in putting pressure on the government. Had the media not discovered this case, the government possibly would have made some sort of a compromise with the Americans, let Raymond Davis go. But the media itself is now putting everything back on the front. It wants the government to be on a back foot. It wants the government to answer.
For the first 3.5 weeks, U.S. media outlets